welcome to Western Insights. When it comes to complicated relationships, there are few at the scale of the one between the US and China. China is poised to overtake the US as the world's largest economy by the end of this decade and is using its economic weight to increase its global influence through the Belt and Road Initiative, pressure on trading partners such as Canada and Australia, and expansion of trade deals such as the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership and the new EU-China Investment Agreement. Intellectual property, access for foreign investors, opportunities for exporters, and a growing competition over technological leadership are all on the agenda. Where are China and the United States likely to clash on economic issues? And where do they have opportunities for cooperation? How will President Biden respond to the economic challenge from China? In this episode of Western Insights, we will shed light on the larger issues while explaining where the sideshows may distract us. Joining us today are Britton Scott, managing partner in Winston & Strawn LLP Shanghai's office. Britton has lived and worked as corporate attorney in China for more than 25 years. He has extensive experience in advising and working with US, EU businesses in the PRC, including mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, green and brownfield projects, IP theft and trade secret protection, and labor and employment matters. During his time in the PRC, he has worked with clients in multiple sectors, including, among others, automotive, aerospace, medical device, retail, financial services, and chemical. He has been recognized as leading lawyer in China by Chambers, that's for mergers, acquisitions, and insurance, for more than a decade, and in 2020 was named a best lawyer in China, also for merger and acquisitions. He currently chairs the legal committee at the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, where his responsibilities include organizing and leading legal events for American businesses and in-house counsel, and advising the Chamber's board of directors. In the fall of 2019, he joined other leaders from the Shanghai American business community in Washington, D.C. for a door knock, where he met with House and Senate leaders, along with various government department leaders, including Treasury and the State Department, to report on the impact of the U.S.-China trade war on American business interests in China and discuss solutions. Britton is also a Western Economics alumni and has been a featured speaker multiple times for our College of Business and Economics. He also joined Western's Foundation Board of Directors in 2020. Shifeng Chen is currently the Kaiser Professor of International Business and Director of the Center for International Business at Western. Shifeng obtained his PhD in International Business from the University of Illinois. His research interests include outsourcing, licensing, and foreign direct investment. His work has been published in the Journal of International Business Studies, Journal of Retailing, Strategic Management Journal, among others. Prior to moving to Western Washington University, Shifeng was a tenured full professor at Ivey Business School at the University of Western Ontario. His teaching areas include global strategy, global marketing, and global value chain. Moderating our discussion today is Ted Alden. Ted is Western's Ross Distinguished Visiting Professor and a Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. Ted is the former Washington Bureau Chief for the Financial Times, has authored multiple books, and has contributed to most major media outlets in addition to offering his thoughts in congressional testimony. His specialization areas are international trade policy, U.S. immigration policy, and the future of work. A little housekeeping before we dive in today. Closed captioning is available for this event. You will find that down in your down in the bottom of your screen there under closed captioning. Sorry for that. Using Zoom, you can of course activate that anytime you'd like. Some of you have submitted questions with your registration, and we do appreciate those, of course. If you have additional questions today, please use Zoom Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom middle of your screen. We will be responding to questions throughout the discussion today, so don't be shy. Okay, Ted, let's dive in.
Thank you very much, James, and it's great to be here with Britton and with Shifeng. Thank you both for joining us, particularly Britton, all the way from Shanghai. So I'm going to start with you. You've been working in China more than 2 decades now, have seen conditions change enormously for business over that time. Currently, most of us at a distance are focused on what looks like a turning away from reform in China. We have various political crackdowns, including what's going on in Hong Kong, a more aggressive economic posture internationally, and what seems to be a growing role for the state and the Communist Party in China. How have these developments been affecting the environment for foreign companies in China?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a very lawyerly-like question too. It's so nicely open-ended. It gives you many avenues to go down. I would suggest that it's been very negatively impacting U.S. business, and not just U.S., but most foreign businesses in China. Let me give you an example. As you noted at the outset, I chair the legal committee at the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. And we have a subcommittee for in-house counsel within that group. So there's probably about 25, 30 members of this. Most of them are general counsel for US businesses based here in Shanghai. And about a month ago, many of you probably know, the Ministry of Commerce in China issued the equivalent of it's not a statute, but it's a rule, what would be called like a blocking rule, like they have in the EU, as sort of a countermeasure to the Treasury, the OFAC, and State Department lists, basically saying that compliance with any foreign laws that interferes with China's national interest would be considered criminal potentially, and there was that basically giving an outlet for Chinese businesses to complain and actually seek damages in the event that they're harmed as a result of compliance with these foreign laws and statutes. So there's a lot of, I guess, confusion is the word I would use, certainly within the business community about it's kind of a go ask your mother, go ask your father kind of situation. So and the sort of view that a lot of businesses are taking right now is wait and see, but we have seen for example with COVID, an acceleration of the decoupling for the very reason that a lot of foreign nationals have just not been even able to get back to China. My own example, it took me 8 months. I went back for Chinese New Year and I ended up spending 8 months at my house out in Blaine before I finally managed to get back. And it was quite a journey to get back. So, I would say that the impact without question is quite negative. And then of course, with the new administration in place, and the reference to the fact that I was in DC is, I put that out there purposefully because the one thing I learned is whilst we certainly are divided at the legislative level in the United States, and in the United States in terms of our views about the direction the country should go in, there's little or no division when it comes to China. So in terms of any sort of expectations that there's going to be a change in U.S. policy towards China, I would say de minimis, other than perhaps more focus on human rights. So Hong Kong is going to become more of an issue, as as are the Uyghurs, the workshops out in Western China. So I think that is one of the key impacts. But as sort of the opening salvo, I guess that's what I would say, Ted.
Thank you very much, Jan. We're going to dive a little more into the Biden administration and what it means. Shifen, it's great to see you. Shifen and I have offices that are about 15 feet apart on the campus, but we haven't seen each other in about a year now with COVID. So even though it's not as far as Shanghai, we're all kind of divided. Shifen, one of the interesting things here is even as we're facing all of the disruption and uncertainties that Britain is talking about, we've heard a lot about China pursuing new trade arrangements. James mentioned the RCEP in the opening comments, this trade agreement within Asia. At the end of last year, China signed a new investment agreement with Europe. Let's start with a kind of a key distinction point. How do these trade and investment agreements differ from each other, and how should we be looking at this from the United States?
Okay, thank you, Ted, and thank you, Jim, for organizing this event, and thank Brinton for joining us from Shanghai. If you look at the economic tie between two countries, roughly you can classify them into two major categories. The first one is what I call trade. Trade means that you have goods flow from one country to the other country. And that is the more used by China to serve the worldwide market. Basically, they use China as a production plant, a platform, and then send the finished product to the worldwide market. And the other category we can call investment. Investment means a flow of production factor, mostly capital and knowledge across national border. And that is the more preferred by US companies to serve the worldwide market. So let me give you two examples. We are buying Apple's iPhone made in China in the US. That is trade. Chinese company put together the product and then send the product to the US. But on the other hand, if you look at GM, set up a production plant in China and make a car in China and sell cars in China, that is direct investment. And a lot of people will be surprised to find that, in fact, the trade number, we have a huge trade deficit against China every year. A lot of people will be surprised to find out that those trade deficits do not include the profit made by American company in China. So we really don't know the true picture, okay, about the economic tie between U.S. China. We know how many goods exported from China to the United States. We have a statistic on those activities, but we don't really know how much profit the U.S. company have been generating from the Chinese company. No one knows the number. Okay, so when you talk about the true agreement, I'll say that is a trade agreement. The goal of the trade agreement is to create a common market across Asia. But if you look at the EU-China comprehensive investment agreement, that is an agreement related to investment rather than trade. So this is an important distinction between the two.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Yvonne. And I think one of the things we may talk about a little more too is how the reasons for investment in China have been changing somewhat from a platform for trade, a way to take advantage of lower labor costs to sell goods to the rest of the world, and increasingly companies wanting to access the large and growing Chinese market. Brenton, this kind of leads us nicely into the next question. I mean, I covered trade policy as a reporter in DC. I've been following, trade for 3 decades now, and the policy on China for a long time was, well, we need to get China to reform its trade laws, to open up to investment, to open up to Western goods. We seem to be moving away from that in some pretty dramatic ways. So tell us a little bit about how you think the Biden administration is going to approach China. And you suggested at the outset that you're expecting a lot of continuity with the Trump administration, which of course was, 4 years of on and off trade war with China and a range of other sanctions that you alluded to. What do you think is going to happen now with the new president? You're muted there, Brenton. You gotta.
Yeah, there I am. I'm back. Okay.
Yeah.
The good news is it pops up in all caps. You're muted. Which is genius.
You don't need me to remind you. Go ahead.
The dummy button. Yeah. So great question. Yeah. So I think I alluded to it earlier. I think I think one of the key differences that we're going to see is Biden is going to be much less of an isolationist. So we won't be going it alone anymore, right? So notwithstanding a lot of differences between the EU and the United States, the old saying, "The enemy of my enemy," right, is my ally. I would suggest that we're going to see much more bilateral approach to addressing issues that are arising out of China and continue to arise to this day.
Sorry, just checking on that, Brenton. You mean bilateral, sort of directly engaging with China the way that Trump did, or do you see more as kind of working with allies?
Multilateral. Yeah, multilateral. Excuse me. Thanks. So multilateral approach, and so I think we will see more collaboration where there's common interests, and there are a lot of common interests. You referenced, for example, this agreement between the European Union and China. So I know the chair of the EU chamber in Beijing, Jörg Wuttke. I've known this guy for a really long time. And if you actually look at the agreement and look at the detail, it's basically another paper lion. There's just a lot of fluff in there with no real substance, which is a typical type of agreement. I mean, if you want to look at a legitimate agreement, look at the Phase 1 trade agreement, which actually we covered last year in January. That was between the United States and China. This came out in like the 15th of January in 2020, literally weeks before COVID exploded. So it kind of got lost, in the rush to focus on COVID-19. But that had legitimate teeth. For example, to make a determination as to whether or not China was, living up to its commitment, it came back to Secretary of Commerce. That Wilbur Ross, I think, was the sole decision maker in that one, which clearly said, no more making promises and not coming through. So we're not seeing a mad rush of European businesses to jump on the bandwagon and come racing back into China with more foreign investment. So so on the first part, as I noted, there's going to be the more multilateral approach, I think, to China, which is good, in my opinion. It helps. And then secondly, what I said earlier, there's going to be much more focus on the human rights side of things, which is going to continue to strain relations as the United States focuses on issues such as Hong Kong and and Western China, as by way of example. And then other than that, I don't think we're going to see a lot of. Personally, I don't think we'll see a lot of changes, and that seems to be the view of the American business community here as well.
Very, very. I mean, I do think we're going to see a fair bit of tensions between the United States and Europe over this. There's been a lot made recently in the newspapers of the fact that China is now Europe's largest trading partner. It's surpassed the United States. So the Europeans have a lot of interest in maintaining this. Thank you, Brenton. It's actually, in some ways, a kind of similar question building off that for Shifen. And during the Trump administration, we heard a lot of talk about decoupling. That we were going to see trade and investment and other links between China and the United States diminish significantly, and the two countries were going to go in different directions. New report just out today from the Rhodium Group in New York and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce saying that that kind of decoupling, if it's on a large scale, is going to produce massive costs for the U.S. economy. I think their top line figure was 190 billion in lost economic growth. Briefly, talk to us about what decoupling means and whether there's evidence of this happening. And just let me note an audience question. I'm going to turn next to audience questions. One of the audience members astutely pointed out that during the Cold War with Russia, the United States didn't trade very much with Russia. So decoupling was not really an issue, but China is second largest trading partner for the United States. So this is a significant issue. So what is decoupling and how much of it have we seen?
Okay, if you want to talk about decoupling, then we need to look at coupling first. So if you go back to look at just after 2000, after China joined WTO, World Trade Organization, if you look at imports from by US from China, increased from $100 billion every year to over $400 billion. So that's a lot of imports coming from China. And a lot of people would be surprised to find out most of the imports we get from China. In fact, they are under the name of US exporter in China rather than Chinese importer. The reason is outsourcing, like Apple. Apple does not really have a production plant in China. Apple actually find Foxconn is a Taiwanese company that hire over 1 million assembly workers to put together iPhone, iPad, Mac computer, and then send them to the US market. So now we're talking about decoupling. Okay, take example of Apple. Move assembly plant out of China. We have two options. One option is to move Apple's assembly line back to the United States. First of all, you need to look at the labor cost difference between China and US. That's going to drive up the price of the product substantially. But that is not the only challenge. The other challenge is the supply chain. Apple computer, Apple iPhone, they contain hundreds or even thousands of parts and components. And many of them are made in China. So when you want to move assembly back to the United States, that means you need to move the whole supply chain back to the United States. And I would say that probably we will never be able to replicate the supply chain that China enjoy right now in the United States. So moving back, decoupling by moving back American company activity to the US, that is very unlikely. The other option is moving those activities to other countries, such as India, such as Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, or Indonesia. Then you have the issue of the size of China, 1.4 billion people, and then the size of Apple's assembly plant in China, Foxconn, that hire over 1 million assembly workers. How could Foxconn find 1 million assembly workers in other countries. That's another challenge. The second challenge is this. For Foxconn to move its operation out of China, it needs to get the green light from China. Otherwise, the Chinese government will make the life of Foxconn in China really difficult. So that is the hostage effect. I think a lot of companies that have operation in China, they will think twice before they make any move in decoupling, because potential hostage effect of their operation in China.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very interesting. I was on a webinar yesterday hosted by the Washington State China Relations Council, and I don't think they've put up the video yet, but they were discussing a report that just leaked recently, and I think we're going to put up on the website here, that's been very influential in the Biden administration, kind of suggesting two tracks, one on the consumer track that you're talking about where things may not change a lot, but others where the products are really sensitive, like semiconductors, where we could see quite dramatic changes. Let's go to our first audience question. Maybe this one for Britton, since you've lived there in Asia for such a long time. Question was a kind of broad one. How do other Asian countries fit into this, struggle of the giants, the U.S. and China, for economic dominance? What are the impacts on the rest of Asia? How are other countries in Asia looking at this issue?
That's a great question. I think they're looking at it as an opportunity, obviously. I actually attended a seminar yesterday put on by the Hudson Institute, and there's a new book out on the One Belt, One Road. The guy who wrote the book, very interesting guy. I think he's a PhD candidate at Harvard right now. Anyway, he likened the situation between China and the United States, and if you look at the One Belt, One Road policy, it's much more geared towards influencing, right, other parts of the world, and reference is made to the International Development Finance Corporation, which is our sort of American answer to One Belt, One Road, and there was a very specific discussion about how historically during the Cold War, this sort of intermediate countries, these other countries were able to take advantage of the two superpowers sort of fighting over each other for the same turf by going, playing them off against each other to get the money that they were using for these infrastructure projects, right? So one of the areas that we still see is China is very has a very good game plan in terms of their ability to do these infrastructure projects in all these other parts of the world. And so certain countries have certainly opened the door. Pakistan comes to mind, a lot of countries in Africa. Other countries, on the other hand, have tried to remain neutral or have rejected. So in terms of, that's one impact. In terms of growth, there certainly is, let's say, in order to spread the risk, I do see a lot of U.S. businesses starting to close down operations. I think that was already happening anyway, because we talk about rising labor costs. So without a question, that's at the top of the list. And then finally, compliance with Treasury and State Department rules and the lists are forcing businesses to break regardless, particularly in the tech area.
Just quickly, does the Australia example make people in the region nervous? China has blocked a series of exports from Australia for a variety of political reasons, but mostly having to do with Australia's insistence on an investigation into the origins of the virus. How much concern is that caused, or is it a bigger issue out here than it is in the region?
I don't know if I can really answer that question, because I don't do a lot in those other parts of
fair
Asia.
enough.
So,
fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. Shifan, I actually wanted to ask you a kind of related question about other Asian countries, which is, where does Taiwan fit in all of this? I mean, again, from a Western perspective here, a lot of nervousness about the relationship between China and Taiwan, and Taiwan is kind of the Saudi Arabia of semiconductor fabrication. TSMC is the biggest chip maker in the world. Taiwan wants to improve its trade ties with the West, but China's pushing back. How is Taiwan reacting to the current situation? What do you see happening in terms of Chinese-Taiwan economic relations?
Okay, I'm happy to talk about that. I grew up in Taiwan and I go back to Taiwan regularly, pay close attention to the relationship between the two sides. And even though I am from Taiwan, I still see the relationship between China and Taiwan as an intriguing one. Why I call that an intriguing relationship? If you look at, on the one hand, political hostility between the two sides had increased substantially over the past few years. But at the same time, if you look at economic tie, getting closer between the two sides. Just last year, Taiwan set the historic record about trade reliance on the Chinese market. Over 40% of export from Taiwan eventually go to China. So you can see that the two sides. The political side, you have unprecedented hostility. Chinese military fly fighter jet outside of Taiwan almost on daily basis. But at the same time, Chinese manufacturers, they line up outside of TSMC trying to get semiconductor imported from Taiwan. Economically, I can see a great complementarity between the two sides. Taiwan have the know-how, technology, but China have the land, the site, the labor force for them to work together. But politically, China claim Taiwan is part of China. But Taiwanese people just want China to leave them alone. Okay, so that is one side of the issue. The other side of the issue is this. Taiwan have two big trade partners, not just China, but also the United States. And the US is also a close political ally of China, of Taiwan. So for people in Taiwan or Taiwanese government, they also need to balance between US and China. And if you look at previous government in Taiwan, KMT government, they want to have a close tie, better relationship with China, and leading to eventual reunification of the two sides. But the current government, DPP, they want to have a more independent, closer relationship to the United States, and eventually they hope to have an independent country. And again, over the past 4 years, during Trump administration, regarding unfair bilateral relationship, political tie, Taiwan is actually moving away from China to the US, and that anger the Chinese government as well. So when you look at how Taiwan fit into this situation, I think Taiwanese government or Taiwanese people need to be really careful in balancing the political hostility and economic tie with China, and in balancing the distance with the US and with China.
Yeah, I mean, my Washington organization, my DC organization, Council on Foreign Relations, every year produces a report on hotspots to worry about, and China Taiwan is now at the top of that list. I think a lot of concern over some forms of conflict there. Britton, we've got a great question that came in over the transom. Again, kind of open-ended, but I think it's a really good one, which is, why has China been able to grow so much stronger than the United States? At times it feels like our economy, our democracy, feels like our democracy is kind of bloated. Are there lessons that we can learn from China here in the United States? I'm happy to take a bit of that too, because I'm paying a little bit of attention to what the Biden administration is thinking on these. But what, having been there a long time, what's the secret sauce in China? Why has it been so successful at not just generating growth, but sustaining it for many years now?
Well, I have to say that you have to appreciate that, when I first came to China in 1990, people were still riding bicycles everywhere. There were no automobiles. And I remember going to Beijing and being right at the heart of the city and seeing a donkey cart go right past Tiananmen Square. So, 30 years ago, we were at zero. And the policy that, came forward in terms of the opening of the door, it created a lot of opportunities and a lot of businesses rushed into this market. So there was just, literally, trillions of dollars of foreign investment coming into the economy. The policies were, there were tax benefits, there were all sorts of benefits to coming into the market, in addition to cheap labor. So I think one of the reasons has been that it's just a catching up. So it's a natural, give an example, if you look at the financial services sector, it's still developing. And so if you compare, for example, a developed market like the United States or Europe, for example, and you see where premium growth comes on the insurance side, you'll see that it's stagnant or very little growth, and the only way you can grow is through acquisition. In a market like China, where it's still growing, year on year, for example, premiums, 15 to 20% growth per annum. So part of it is it's a catching up phase. If you look at basic economic principles, right, in a free competition, eventually competition will drive that profitability out of the market, and everything will start to level off eventually. I think the other part of it is that in China, the government doesn't use market principles when it comes to development. So whether it's profitable or not is irrelevant. It's a whole different mindset here, right? Your return on investment in this country means, influence, right? And the ability to control. And so, and let's be honest, we shouldn't say China, we should say Beijing, because all the decision-making really comes out of a very small group in a very small part of the country. So the entire country is run by, a leadership at the top level. That doesn't mean that, or at least those decisions are made. It doesn't mean that that's not, it's the same as it gets implemented throughout the various provinces and local cities throughout China. They're pretty much on their own, but the general policies as a whole come from that group. So, it's hard to compete when you're coming in using market principles, right? Profit and loss, are your key drivers. And you've got versus your competitor, which is a state-owned enterprise that has a bank behind it that will keep giving it money forever, and it'll never go bankrupt. So how eventually you're going to get your legs cut out from underneath you, right? How does that work unless you have the same level of subsidies? So I think there's a lot of factors that come into play, and that's just some of them.
Yeah, thank you. That is a really trenchant observation. And let me just add into the part of the question about, is there merit for the U.S. doing some of this? I think one of the shifts that you saw under the Trump administration that's going to continue under Biden is much more of an embrace of industrial policy. For 25 years now, industrial policy has been a dirty term in the United States. It's government picking winners and losers. Now you're hearing much more about, maybe we actually do need an independent semiconductor fabrication capability, and that's not going to happen with significant government subsidies. And so I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of that coming out of the Biden administration. Xifen, I wanted to turn and talk to you a little bit more about the China-EU investment agreement. Britain called it a paper lion, which was a phrase I like, but essentially saying, not particularly binding, not particularly meaningful. Do these investment agreements matter in terms of influencing the decisions by companies? Does it offer them a level of protection in China that they wouldn't have without the investment agreement?
Well, if you look at a trade relationship between two countries or two regions, over the year, we have seen a lot of trade pact or trade agreement. But we rarely see two countries sign an investment agreement. I believe the U.S. does not have an investment agreement with Japan, but we have a lot of Japanese companies coming to invest in the United States. No problem. Toyota, Honda, they set up an assembly plant in the U.S. They send money in. They buy a piece of them, build a production plant, get the product sold in the U.S. and send the profit back home to Japan. The only thing they need is the term called national treatment. National treatment means that a Japanese investment in the U.S. will be treated as an American company. That's all you need. You don't need to have an investment agreement. The fact that EU need to have an investment agreement with China, that per se signal a regulation problem in China. That means in China, foreign companies don't get national treatment. They got discriminated against by the Chinese government. And I can just give you a few examples. We have the so-called performance requirement for foreign firms in China for many years. First of all, if you want to sell product in China, you need to have a joint venture partner. They also have the so-called local content regulation. If you want to qualify to be a product made in China, 60%, 50%, or even higher of the value of the product need to be created in China. Or export performance requirement, you need to export certain percentage of your output to foreign countries. And the big one is the so-called forced technology transfer. For you to operate in China, you need to transfer knowledge to your local joint venture partner. And the other limitations such as you cannot send money into China freely, you cannot send profit out of China freely. So you have a lot of regulation, and those regulations apply to foreign firms only. They do not really apply to a Chinese company. So this is the reason why EU need to have that agreement of investment with China. Try to get the so-called national treatment that all other countries offer to foreign firms, the before API. So this is actually the agreement, whether it's a paper lion, paper tiger, whatever, it actually signals the problem in China rather than the determination of Chinese government to create a more friendly environment for foreign companies doing operation in China.
Brittany, let me just get your input on this briefly as well, because you've been working with companies there for a long time. And for a long time, the U.S. was talking about doing an investment agreement with China. That seems to be off the table. Will the EU agreement really tackle any of these longstanding issues? Or are they all, the tech transfer and the local content, everything, are they still going to be there regardless?
So at the macro level, so these agreements, in my experience, are sort of a wish list, for lack of a better description, and they don't have teeth in terms from the ability to enforce what seems to have been agreed on paper. Let's use China's entry into WTO as an example, right? In the WTO agreement, there was an understanding that financial services was going to open up, right, to foreign investment. Until about a year ago, and again, I use insurance as an example because it's one of the areas that I do a lot of work in. A foreign investor, first of all, couldn't own more than 50%. Actually, 49% was the cap of a life insurance company in China, which you need in order to write health policies, for example. Now, supposedly the door is open. But what's interesting about that is it was committed to in the year 2000, right? When China joined the WTO. So why in the hell did it take 20 years to implement what was agreed on paper? Because it was not, advantageous, for the local companies. So to open that door, right? So what happens is when you go to the local level and you talk to the officials who are responsible for approving your business license, for example, and you say, yeah, but it's in the WTO agreement, and it's in the list of companies. They're like, yeah, but until we get implementing rules, we're not doing anything. We're just going to wait and see. And so, the proof is in the pudding. And unfortunately, too many times, businesses and foreign businesses have been led down this path of this time we're really going to do it. Really, really, really going to do it. And it's like, fool me once. And I just think that everybody understands that, which is why, the people that I'm speaking to on the ground, it's, it sounds exciting, but it's got a very lukewarm reception from the international community because everyone knows what it really means in practice.
Just very quickly on financial services. That was touted as one of the stronger elements of the Trump phase one deal, that there were going to be some change. Have you actually seen that or same story?
I have seen it. I have seen it actually. We've seen a few investments. We have seen a few changes. For example, Allianz has just set up a holding company and they're making a very aggressive move on the market here, and so and as a German company, they're certainly taking advantage of the tensions between the United States and China. I don't know if that's a one-off example, or if it's really a factual situation. All I know is that the people that I speak with, no one's beating down their doors to jump in. And then I do a lot of M&A work, and so one of the easiest. Let me give you an example. There's the ability to expand into other provinces, for example. So in the United States, it's a state-by-state situation. If you're an insurance company, so you need to get licensed in every state in the United States where you want to operate. Similarly, if you want to operate in another province, you need to make an application to the regulatory authority, which is now the Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission in China. It used to be the Insurance Regulatory Commission, but now the former head of that is in prison for corruption. And anyway, so that being said, I know foreign companies that have been here for 30 years and have only able to get to 3 or 4 provinces, but they're supposed to be able to make an application every year to expand to another province. So if the door's open, why in the hell is it you've only got it into a couple of provinces? So now, now people are looking at it from the perspective of maybe we can acquire, a company that, because you got Chinese companies that, got their license 2 years ago and then there are 16 provinces.
Yeah.
So, that's the reality.
Yeah, you some kind of shortcut there. Yeah, we've got another good question that's come in from the audience, Xifan. I'll direct this one to you. It says, we've been working with Chinese companies on tech and manufacturing for years and have noticed a large increase in wages lately. There's predictions that China will overtake the U.S. In the next 5 or 6 years as the largest economy in the world. Have we seen impacts from these rising wages? Is China becoming less attractive to foreign investors because of the growing wage costs?
Okay, before I answer the question, let me say something about the trade investment agreement between EU and China. It does the power to enforce is a wish list rather than a real agreement. Remember, I said earlier, China prefer to export products to foreign countries. They do not invest a lot in foreign countries. So when you talk about an agreement, one way to enforce the agreement is retaliation. If you make my life miserable in your country, I'm going to make your life miserable in my country as well. But then we have this imbalance in economic time, because German company invest heavily in China. So Chinese government can make German company in China miserable. But US Chinese company do not invest heavily in Germany. So German government have no way to retaliate if China impose some discriminatory regulation against foreign firms. And the same thing happened in the US. Chinese government can force American company to transfer technology to Chinese company. But the US government cannot retaliate by doing the same thing. First of all, we don't have a lot of Chinese investors in the United States. Even we have, they do not own technology, but American company really want. So to make an investment agreement enforceable, probably we need to combine trade agreement and investment agreement into a single one. So if Chinese government make American companies' life in China miserable, then the US government can raise tariffs, impose quota as retaliation. Okay, so that's the thing I want to add to.
No, I mean, let me just add, and I think it's a very important point. The difficulty is just the imbalance, as you say. U.S. companies are investing so much more in China, and in fact, Chinese investment in the U.S. has plunged quite dramatically because of security reviews through CFIUS and other things. So we've seen some of that retaliation, but maybe not changed the dynamic that Brinton talked about. Excellent, that's a good addition. Can we talk? Let's talk about the wage piece a little bit as well.
Over the year, wage and operation costs increased substantially to foreign companies. But I think a lot of people who are doing business in China also recognize that productivity and skill level of Chinese workers also increased substantially. So you just don't look at wage. you look at productivity. In terms of productivity, I think China is still a good place for you to locate your plant over there. I think a lot of companies, they are thinking about moving out of China. I think it's the uncertainty. The uncertainty of regulation in China itself. The uncertainty about trade relationship between US and China. Look at what happened in the previous 4 years. You have a company in China, suddenly they need to pay 25% tariff in sending product to the United States. The people want to have the predictability rather than that kind of uncertainty. So if you look at what is going to hurt Chinese economy in the future, it's not really well because productivity increase accordingly is the uncertainty, internal uncertainty and external uncertainty. And Chinese government also see this. So they try to dry up domestic demand, trying to reduce their reliance on foreign market for jobs, for their economic growth. But I think they still have a long way to go because people in China, they tend to save a lot for their future because they don't have the social security net. They don't have the retirement money. They don't have, Medicare, whatever. So they do not spend all their money. They save a lot for their retirement. And unless the Chinese government can offer the same kinds of social security net that we have in the US, it's very unlikely that the Chinese government can drive up domestic demand to reduce their reliance on foreign market for jobs and for economic growth.
Yeah, thank you. Though, as you say, they are certainly trying. Britton, we had another audience question that's a little bit on the sort of soft power dimension that you talked about with Belt and Road, and the questioner says China's taken the opportunity to try to further its influence by helping poor countries get their citizens vaccinated. Is it fair to say that China's trying to position itself to leverage this vaccine assistance for future benefits in either economic or strategic? I mean, how is this helpful to China? Should the U.S. be trying to respond in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general consensus in the sort of the global community is, yeah, certainly it's the ability to get the Sinopharm vaccine done and out, notwithstanding its efficacy, right? What is it, 52%? It's just a couple of points above the WHO minimum standards, right? But it's out there, and it's an opportunity. I don't want to say lost. I think it's an opportunity, for example, for the Biden administration to move quickly to help export the U.S.
The Pfizer and the
Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, the ones that are out there, and do the same thing. Without a question, I think that it's a good it's been well received, and it also helps govern or control the narrative too about the source of it. And I mean, right, if you turn out to be the good grandpa handing out the drug, right versus the guys who made a lot of noise about it but haven't done anything to help. What have you done to help me lately? This gets back to what we were talking about on the soft power. I just want to change gears a little bit. I think one of the most interesting developments recently, and I'm sure you've all paid attention to this, but it's kind of gone in a bit of a different direction. But I think you all saw last week that Tesla, right, invested in Bitcoin, right, and then you saw BNY Mellon jumped on board, right, and now they're moving in. And I think one of the biggest threats to American soft power is not necessarily China's ability to distribute immunizations around the world, but rather the move towards blockchain. And remember that the only reason that OFAC and the Treasury Department have so much strength is because the world needs the American banking system, right? We've got a 70-plus-year-old banking system in the United States that the world relies upon. And if the dollar loses its prominence as an international currency, as we move towards a Bitcoin, for example, That's probably, or cryptocurrency, right? Then and that's going to be a whole nother game. That's going to be a real game changer. And then what's left, right? Diplomacy possibly, and then we're talking conflict, armed conflict. So it's an interesting point. But I've met some people over here. For example, I met someone recently at Fudan University, and they're pouring an unbelievable amount of money into this research department, to work specifically on blockchain. And Singapore has been extremely active in this respect. And the biggest issue we have in the United States, I think, is getting our heads around it and on the regulatory side. Right, that's the biggest issue. So I know I really shifted gears on you, but
no, it's a good gear shift, because one of the questions I had in my pocket was, is the U.S. dollar potentially threatened as a reserve currency? And the answer is usually the renminbi is not remotely prepared for that. But you're talking about a kind of end run around this through blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and I think it could have really significant implications. Okay, we've just got about 2 minutes here left, so I'm going to ask you to put on your very quick advisor hats here. A big American company comes to you, says, is it a good time to invest in China? What do you tell them? Is it a good time to invest in China, or is it a good time to run screaming in the other direction? Shifen, why don't I start with you, and then we'll let Britton have the last word here.
Okay, I would say that over the year, from the openings of the economy in China up to now, we have been increasing our commitment to the Chinese market in many different ways. And I would say it's time to go to the other direction, because if you look at trade number, if you look at, China have become so dominant in many areas, not to mention the political relationship between the US and China. Just for, business common sense, you don't want to put all eggs in one basket, and you have some other country to diversify. So that would be my suggestion. It's time to diversify.
Britton, I'll throw that to you. And just to be clear, because I realize you're in an awkward position, there are obviously great opportunities in financial services, but if we put it somewhere else, what's your advice to U.S. companies that are looking at the Chinese market?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the industry, right? So if you're not an at-risk industry, if you're not high tech, so for example, automotive, I suppose, is probably a safe area. It has been for a long time, although the last year has been kind of slammed. If you're high tech, I would say that you've got so much risk coming into this market in terms of the underlying assumption is policy isn't going to change. We're not, and even if it does change at the presidential level, there's only so much that can be done once the gears are put in motion at the administrative level in the United States. So it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle. So I think it's a sector by sector analysis, but I don't disagree that it's certainly an opportunity to spread the risk, and I certainly think that other countries are looking at this as a potential opportunity to jump in there. In our lifetime, will there ever be another China? I don't think so. I can't think of any other place in the world other than maybe India. And India is, it's such a mess of red tape. Anybody who's ever tried to go there, all things considered, there's a lot to be said, for, a government that controls everything, right? One decision maker. There's certainly, you got to say, but on the other hand, you look at things like the Great Leap Forward or, the Cultural Revolution, you go, well, whoops-a-daisy, right? Nobody ever talks about that. But, let's be truthful that, you can't, it's not all home runs, right?
Yeah. So I've got 30 seconds left that James will indulge me. So you got a one-word response to this. Looking at your crystal ball, 4 years from now at the end of the Biden administration, is the U.S. economic relationship with China more contentious or more cooperative? Shifen, more contentious, more cooperative?
I would say competition.
So halfway, you're going to split the difference halfway. Britton, I'm going to give you the last word. You think things are going to get worse or they're going to get better?
I also say neutral.
Okay.
I think it's going to be. I think it's going to remain unchanged.
Okay. Okay. Very good, James. I'm going to send it back to you. Thank you to both our panelists for a great discussion. You are muted, James. You got to unmute yourself to finish this off. There we
No,
go.
I won't. I won't unmute. I just want to say thank you again. This is so fabulous. We a truly international presentation today for Western Insights, and so Brenton, we really we appreciate this, phoning in from tomorrow and tomorrow morning at that. So thank you for that. So thank you all of us for joining us today for Western Insights. From all of us at Western Washington University and the College of Business and Economics, we want to thank you for joining us today. We also want to thank the Western Alumni Association and the Western Foundation for their support of this series. And we know that they would like us to thank those of you who chose to support the university as part of this effort. In 2 weeks, that's March 5th, Western Insights returns with a discussion on the emerging workplace. With so many employees working from home, fully or in part, the definitions of work-life balance, team building, time off, sick time, and hours of work, they're all open to discussion. Plan to join us for that discussion. This and previous Western Insight sessions are available online. We'll be sending you an email very brief shortly with a link to those sessions, some further resources from our panel, and an invitation to give your feedback on this session. So be sure to take a look for that email in your inbox. Have a great day, stay safe, mask up, and remember you and your actions are a key part of our long-term recovery effort.